welcome to Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chalmers, giving you a Christian conservative view of today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today's show, the topic of discussion, Dr. Anthony Fauci. I know you probably have enough of him all day long through the left-leaning media, but we're going to look at Fauci through a little different light today. My guest has written a book about Anthony Fauci, and I think Steve Deace, the author of this book, has a little different narrative about Fauci than what you're going to get from MSNBC, CNN, CBS, ABC, and so forth and so on. So we'll get to Steve Deace in just a few minutes. Real quick, though, heads up, Washington Times offering a 50% discount deal for listeners of Bold and Blunt podcast. Just go to washingtontime.com/Cheryl. Type in your information, and you can have 50% discount off a year's subscription to the digital edition of the Washington Times. It's a great bargain. I know regular listeners hear this pitch every episode, but I can tell you this, that deal's not going to last forever. So snag it while you can. Get it while you can. Get it for the summer months. So while you're wearing your face mask and doing your Fauci-approved exercises, socially distancing from everybody on the beach, you can put your iPod on and listen to the latest episode of Bold and Blunt for a 50% discount deal. Yes, podcasts are included in that digital platform access. So washingtontimes.com/Cheryl. And while you're at it, please sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter through the Washington Times. It's delivered right to your email box. It gets there by about 11:15 in the morning. That's Eastern time, in time for lunch, in time to share with your coworkers for lunchtime discussion. And you'll have access to all my daily commentaries as well as my twice weekly podcast, Bold and Blunt. So sign up for it. Just go to the website, washingtontimes.com, find my name, click on my name, and there are, at the bottom of all my commentaries, there are directions that will take you right to the sign-up page for my newsletters and my podcast, Bold and Blunt. So, Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci, he's a strange guy, isn't he? He's kind of king of the world right now. Anthony Fauci. He reminds me of, and I hope this isn't dating me too much, but there was an ad when I was growing up that talked about E.F. Hutton, and E.F. Hutton was an investment company. And when the tagline was, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And it used to be if E.F. Hutton walking down the street, or people walking down the street, and suddenly E.F. Hutton would speak and everybody would stop dead in their tracks and kind of cock their heads as if they're listening intently to some whispering in the wind, and that would be E.F. Hutton. So it was obviously it was a great ad because I still remember it all these years later. But that's sort of the platform that Anthony Fauci has been handed over the last year. And for people who love America, people who love freedom, they look at the platform this guy's been handed with a little bit of alarm and dismay. And rightly so. Who is Anthony Fauci that when he says something, we all jump? I mean, the guy's a medical bureaucrat, okay? He's not God. And he's not even that prophetic. If you look at his statements, at his predictions, at his recommendations, at his guidance over the very long months of the shutdown of the coronavirus, based in large part on Anthony Fauci's recommendations, if you look at what he said over the months, he's not even accurate. I imagine that he just kind of goes behind closed doors and rolls a few dice, or just brews a cup of tea and gently stirs the tea leaves in it. And he kind of looks down at the tea leaves and he tries to read them. And then he takes the best guess scenario of what the tea leaves offer him, and he goes out on national TV and makes those recommendations based on his tea leaf best guess. And when the tea leaves aren't giving him the messages, he's got the trusty handy-dandy dice that he rolls. Evens, people get to go to work. Odds, people stay home. Evens, churches can open. Odds, churches stay closed. And then he goes out there and he makes strange pronouncements based on completely, utterly unscientific phrases. I honestly, the guy gets an A for creativity. He stands on the national stage and he tells us, this was when he was still working for Donald Trump. He stands on the national stage and has the gall to say, well, I don't deal with policy. I only deal with science. And yet, he's the policy whisperer, right? I mean, basically, everything that he spoke under President Donald Trump was suggestions, recommendations, guidance, warnings, red flag, siren alarms about if you don't do this, well, then the science says people will die. So how is that scientific, right? Science is based on data and facts and figures and facts and as factually accurate as we can get facts. That's science. And policy is how people should behave. Policy is the guidance given to humans on how they should live their lives. Regulation, policy, agendas, day-to-day living, behavior patterns, that sort of thing. So when Anthony Fauci says that if people don't wear a face mask, no, make that two face masks. Oh, wait, with face masks and goggles and gloves and two face masks, make that two face masks, because that's common sense. If one works, then two works even better. It's common sense, he says. So he issues things like that, calling it science, and then tags on the very frightening sounding phrase, people will die. But that's not policy. I'm not making policy. I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm not advising people how they should act. I'm just saying, if you don't do what the science says, then people will die. And since I'm the guy in charge of determining what is scientific versus what is not scientific, by logical extension, if you don't do what I say, people will die. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. This guy is like a king of the world, all the while having plausible deniability that he acts like a king. It's funny. He's like 5 foot something. 5'7", 5'6". You know who else was 5'7", 5'6"? Napoleon. Interesting. Just saying.
A substantial proportion of the population takes the vaccine, I think we're going to be going in the right direction towards approaching some degree of normality as we head into 2021 in the second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020.
Well, some degree of normality. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? What it means is you can kind of interpret that how you want. See, to me, when you say some degree of normality, it means that some individual liberties will be given back to the people by the government, and the government will maintain hold of other individual liberties. Which ones? Well, we don't know, because some degree of normality gives an out. It gives an out. Anthony Fauci can say, well, some degree of normality means that marijuana shops can operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but churches can only open for 30%, no, make that 32.4% of capacity, and only on Saturdays between the hours of 4 a.m. and 7:19 a.m., because that's what his science has dictated. That's some degree of normality. It means that the government can stretch this out as long as it wants for its own crackdown, lockdown, liberty stealing agendas. But that's how his language has been all along. It's just really open to interpretation, very non scientific. Listen again to what he said.
A substantial proportion of the population takes the vaccine, I think we're going to be going in the right direction to.
Blah, blah, blah. You heard it. But did you catch that? Did you catch that open ended phrase? He always talks like that, always. A substantial proportion of the population. What does that mean? Is that science? Is that science, or is that just throwing out there some sort of phrase that leaves it open ended to how you determine at any point in time what constitutes substantial proportion? This is how people who want to maintain their control. They throw out open-ended type phrases aimed at generating the type of response that says, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. He sounds really intelligent. This is Anthony Fauci. He's got lots of degrees. He's a really smart guy. He's in charge of infections and stopping infections and diseases and stopping diseases. So he knows what he's talking about. And he uses big words like substantial proportion. But that's not scientific. That's not data. That's not anything concrete that the American citizens can latch onto as a standard. A substantial proportion. Who determines? And do the determinations change over time? Well, yes, they do. They certainly do, because we've seen them change. This goes back to the very, very beginning of the coronavirus and all the government crackdowns in response to the coronavirus. The flatten the curve argument. Flatten the curve, flatten the curve. Well, who determined the curve in the first place? It was based on testing. It was based on constantly changing testing. The numbers of people who signed up for testing, the numbers of tests that were available, the medical professional fields and the government bureaucrat fields' way of computing the testing. If somebody tests positive on Monday and they take the test again on Tuesday and they test positive again on Tuesday, is that one test positive? Or is that two? Well, in many instances, it was counted as two. And also, let's not forget the faulty test kits. So the flatten the curve argument, even that was something that was open to interpretation because it was in a constant state of change. It was a very fluid type of standard. And you know, when it started, it was flatten the curve, probably take a couple weeks. Guess who was out there on the national platform talking about the need to continue the crackdowns because the curves just weren't flattening quite enough. They weren't meeting the so-called scientific medical data. Why, Anthony Fauci, yes, indeed. And here we are under Joe Biden, under the feckless administration of President Joe Biden, who just will let any leftist agenda steamroll through the White House without resistance. And we've got Anthony Fauci living in total glory, sopping up the fawning from the media, sopping up the fawning from the left, magazine articles, magazine covers, books on Anthony Fauci, books about Anthony Fauci, children's books about Anthony Fauci, so we can train the next generation in the way they should go. Not in the godly way, not in the way of individualism and critical thinking, but in the way of believing Anthony Fauci, believing the medical bureaucrats that they know best for you, the American citizen, how to determine your own private, personal health decisions. One mask. If one mask is good, two masks are better. That's the science that we've been living under. And this is the science that continues to keep us in a lockdown mode. Wake up, America. Anthony Fauci, he's not somebody who should be listened to. He's not somebody who ever should have been listened to, aside from offering up recommendations, along with the recommendations, the equally weighted recommendations from the likes of economists, business owners. How about parents? You know, when I want to know how to protect my health and the health of my children, I don't scroll the headlines for Anthony Fauci's latest recommendations. I just determine them based on my own knowledge, my own intellect. And if I feel I need more help, more research, more information, I'll search it out myself. Or I'll call in experts like my own family doctors. From CNBC just a few days ago, Dr. Fauci hasn't taken a day off in 14 months fighting COVID. Yay, Dr. Fauci. From CNBC in February, Fauci says new data suggests long COVID symptoms. Long COVID symptoms can last up to 9 months. There's another one of those so-called scientific terms, long COVID symptoms. What the freak is that? It doesn't matter what it is, because once Dr. Anthony Fauci throws it out there into the public consciousness, it becomes part and parcel of the so-called fact-based, science-based coronavirus response. Long COVID symptoms. Long COVID symptoms. It's crazy. It's crazy how America has allowed Americans to be shut down this long based on the likes of Dr. Anthony Fauci. And my guest today, thank goodness my guest, Steve Deace. He's the host of the Steve Deace Show on Blaze TV and radio. And he has written a book called The Fauci Bargain. And I got to say, this is a bestseller book, and rightly so, because the narrative out there from the leftists in the media would have you believe that Dr. Anthony Fauci deserves to be king of the world, and we should all bow down and worship at the Fauci feet, because not only does he know best, but he loves each and every one of us and wants to protect each and every one of us from every single virus and disease that will ever come from here to eternity. So God's gift to humankind, I suppose, Dr. Anthony Fauci. That's what we're supposed to believe. My guest today, Steve Deace, probably has a little bit different outlook on this. Steve, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
I'm happy to be here. In a past life, before I came over to the Blaze, I actually wrote for the Washington Times.
Coming home.
Guys again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. All right. So your new book, Fauci Bargain. Who died and made Anthony Fauci God? I mean, my goodness.
Apparently combined intellect within all of Western civilization, excluding the country that exported Greta Thunberg to the world, ironically enough. But other than that, yeah, I mean, there's something beyond, I think, just a normal level of authoritarianism here that I think people feel almost on a spiritual level. Something's not right about this. When have you ever had to encourage politicians to exercise more single-handed power? And yet the desire to hand this all over to public health departments, wash your hands of it on a national level to Anthony Fauci, to not stand up to it on any level whatsoever, to not reassert your authority whatsoever. It's truly mystifying, Cheryl, and it's also terrifying.
Terrifying. Yeah, I agree with that. Now, because Fauci was back under Donald Trump, right? And here he is under
Mhm.
Joe Biden. So when did you first become concerned about the platform that Anthony Fauci was given?
It really even predated Fauci. It was an analysis, doing an analysis of the Imperial College model that really encouraged the West to go down this road of, for the first time ever, let's do the first ever quarantine of healthy people during an outbreak or a plague. That had never occurred, as far as we know, in the history of the human species.
Wow.
Which is why we still have a history of the human species. We don't do stupid things like that. And when you looked at the Imperial College model, I think a lot of people think they have to be, Cheryl, great mathematicians to understand models, and you don't. You have to be a good mathematician in order to program a model, but models all begin with assumptions. So really you have to understand and be able to spot logical fallacies, because all a model is going to do is execute an algorithm based on the assumptions of the modeler.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the assumptions are flawed and aren't congruent with the process or the conclusion, then it's not a problem with the math. This is a philosophical fallacy, which is what much of the Imperial College model was, which is later on with the IHME models from Bill Gates and the University of Washington all turned out to be. And so it really started from that flawed premise that, hey, this model's bunk. I'm not the only one saying it. Scientists at Oxford, the number one university on planet Earth, are publicly saying it. And then they're also backed. Imperial College is one of its biggest benefactors, a guy named Jeremy Grantham, who is a multi-billionaire that's given about 80% of his wealth to ending what he calls the 250-year fossil fuels bubble. He wants the world to go back to the pre-19th century, where people can't get rich like he is ever again. So, I mean, there were just so many problems with this from the very beginning. Now, Mr. Ferguson had over there, who ran this model, had already way oversold his calculations on avian or bird flu a decade earlier. So, I mean, the fact that we were going down this road was already problematic for me. And I expressed that to my audience from the very first day.
Yep.
And then the way that we just anointed a singular individual as if he was infallible. Maybe it's, the fact we just, a couple of years back celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. You throw at me a human being is infallible, and my spidey sense, Cheryl, is going to tingle right away. I've been too active in politics. I know too many people. I've worked and covered too many campaigns. I'm well aware of the fact no one in this process, including the people we agree with, is infallible. So I started just asking contrarian questions just based off of the promotion of Fauci as infallible at that point. And then I ran into the same problems with him that you ran into at the Imperial College model, that it's incongruent. There's too much duplicity, too many inconsistencies that just simply don't make sense. We point these all out in the book. We bring the receipts. There's more footnotes than pages. And now he's kind of become the singular figure of what I like to call COVID stan.
I want to go back to what you said about the models because I find that very interesting. One of the things that frustrated me early on with this whole coronavirus clampdown on individual liberties was that it was based on models. And it was frustrating to me because the very people who would question the models of environmentalism and climate change were the ones that were accepting the models of this coronavirus clampdown effort. So why is that? Why were critically thinking people on the climate change suddenly tossing out their common sense under the coronavirus? Was it simply fear?
I think that's part of it. I think that there is this hesitation within conservative media, and I'm not even talking about ridiculous figures like David French, who I do not consider that's Vichy France. I don't consider that conservative media. But I think there are others who are actual conservatives and don't express that drag queen storytime hour is a blessing of liberty. People that have actual virtues, values, fundamental beliefs. But I think there is this hesitation, particularly in the Trump era, that if they don't play gatekeeper on what is serious and what is not, everyone will lose their damn minds. Everyone will revert to Alex Jones. Everyone will not be able to think critically. I think there is a notion that they have, that some in our industry and movement have bought into, that the rise of Trump had set off a lack of critical thinking amongst the populace, and it's their job to hold that instinct back. And that's always existed in places within conservative review, or conservative media like National Review, for example. They've always viewed them. Fox News has always viewed itself as kind of the gatekeeper of the right of center Overton window. But I think there were the smart set grew its self-anointed ranks in the Trump era without understanding that the rise of Trump is the symptom of what's going on, not the disease. People's increasing frustration with the system, with their gatekeepers, looking for somebody from the outside they thought couldn't be bought off by the system. That Trump was the product of their frustration, not the tipping point or the galvanizer or the impetus for it. And so I think this rising tide within our ranks, there's this, you see this often, and I will admit I recognize it because I bought into it myself at first. And I found myself early in the Trump era tweeting things like, I'd see a story about an exclusive source at the Washington Post and said something completely damning, and I would start my tweet with, "If this is true." And then I realized, like a day or two later, every time I start a tweet with "if this is true," it never turns out to be true, sir. It's never true. Okay? And so I just banned myself, my staff, everybody that works on my show. No one is ever allowed on any of their channels, on our show, on any of your own social media. We are never allowed to address anything from or about this White House that starts with an anonymous source. Period. End of sentence. We're just not doing it. If we can't verify it ourselves, we're not reacting to it. We don't care if everyone in the entire conservative media sphere reacts. We're not talking about it. We're not going down this road. I'm tired of showing my rear end and being wrong. And so I think this idea that it goes beyond, hey, I want to show I'm not like those other right wingers. I think it's a sincere notion that we have to hold back some form of craziness, but the default for that is to swing the other way and wait way too long to buy into certain false premises. I hate to single him out, but I love him to death. I have a huge amount of admiration for Ben Shapiro. I love the success that he's had and the fact that he hasn't sold out to anybody to get to where he has. But I was just mystified at the amount of time he spent last year propping up Scott Gottlieb as a legitimate source of information. He's a complete and total discredited big pharma clown who now wants to admit there was never any science behind their social distancing measures. Okay, I mean, this was the guy that promoted the fraud of remdesivir and everything else. And I just think there's this temptation we have to show we're not nuts. We have legitimate reasons. And I think we just have to understand now we're in a full-fledged cold civil war. And just like Reagan didn't feel like he had to sell the Soviets on his credentials, they're the enemy. I'm not selling the enemy on my credentials. All right? They're out to end my way of life. I think we have to understand the spirit of the age that we're up against is like that great Donald Pleasance rant about Michael Myers in the first Halloween movie: cannot be stopped, cannot be killed, cannot be contained. All right? You can't reason with this. You just have to defeat it. You'll get no credit for it later on for showing a half measure. It's survive and advance. That's what it is. This is a worldview steel cage match now. And two worldviews are going to enter that cage, and only one of them's coming out. And when you're lying there after you've been pinned, they're not going to hold up their hand and say, you know what, we're going to let you back up because you had some really impressive experts. You really bought in at least half of what our fake experts were telling you. Yep. No, I think we're going to have to learn from the beginning to assume we're being lied to on every front and start our discernment from there.
I would love if everybody listening to the show right now were to rewind 2 minutes and listen to what you just said again and again, because that is the singular crucial issue that I think we're facing in this coronavirus crazy. So let's talk about Fauci himself. What are some of the things you found in your research and watching this guy take over the world practically that most bothered you about Anthony Fauci?
It's the duplicity, and the duplicity that this goes beyond what, if you've worked for 5 seconds in politics, you've been lied to. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been lied to by some of the best, man, particularly living in the first in the nation caucus state of Iowa. All right. So, I mean, I get to see the underbelly of national politics every 4 years. I get to see it all. But this is a different level of duplicity. This isn't a dissembling like what Kristi Noem did about a month ago on the trans sports issue. All right. This is, and this goes even beyond like a George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes, and then I signed the largest tax increase ever into law. It is, I gave my initial recommendations on this virus. What he said in January about asymptomatic spread is not how respiratory viruses are primarily, how respiratory virus breakouts are primarily spread and transmitted. He was right about that. And the reason why that matters is that's the biggest lie of this entire last year. We did this lockdown of the healthy because of asymptomatic spread, that healthy people would go to an event, go out in public, get the virus, not know it, come home and kill grandma.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's the biggest lie of this entire thing is asymptomatic spread.
Yep.
He was right in January when he said respiratory viruses are not transmitted primarily through asymptomatic spread. He was right about that. Our CDC estimates right now that's 15% of our cases. And not coincidentally, our CDC has the highest estimate of asymptomatic spread on the entire planet Earth. Most studies, including several from here in the U.S., one at the University of Florida, it's anywhere from like 3 to 8%. He was right in dissing masks on 60 Minutes in early March. He was right in the modest risk assessment of COVID-19 in what he wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine on February 28th of last year. These are all things we cite in our book, Fauci and Bargain. All of his modest warnings, hey, take things seriously. If you're exhibiting any symptoms at all, maybe even in a normal flu season, if it's just a slightly elevated fever, you'd kind of, hey, power through, don't do any of that. All right. All of the things he initially said that we all could have just made these decisions on our own and with a physician and in a private workplace.
Right.
Everything he initially said was correct. And then on March 11th, that is the day the world changed. That's the day Anthony Fauci went to the U.S. Congress and said that this is 10 times worse than the flu. It's Captain Trips. He went full Denethor in Lord of the Rings, run for your lives. Minas Tirith is on fire. No hope. Okay. That night, college basketball and the NBA shut down. Concerts began canceling all over the country and events. By the end of within a week, we were totally shut down as a country. The Imperial Mountain College model came out on the 16th, and essentially the entire Western world was shut down.
March 11th.
And ever since then, ever since that date, Cheryl, he has gone out of his way to diss and discredit any positive news where this virus is concerned. It's a complete, total 180 from everything he said January through February until March the 11th. There was Anthony Fauci pre-March 11th, and then there's been Anthony Fauci ever since. And I think we got a window to the soul as to why in a recent back and forth he had with Rand Paul. And he kept talking about, well, what if, because Rand's questioning him with basic virology. I mean, if I'm naturally immune, why am I getting a vaccine, particularly against dangerous demographics and elderly? Why am I jumping in line ahead of people who are far more vulnerable than me if I already have natural immunity? Why I've been vaccinated. Why am I still wearing a mask? It's just basic fundamental virology. You learn stuff in high school.
Right.
And Fauci keeps going on and on about, well, the new variants. Almost as if every time this particular virus mutates, we have to start our investigative process all over again.
Yep, laying the
The
groundwork.
laws of immunology reset all over again with every mutation. Now, this is either a complete scam and this guy is really dumb, and I don't believe that's the case, having done the research, because all of his initial diagnoses nailed this thing. He struck the landing. So then you're left with another option. There's some data, a piece of information, some piece of data out there that he doesn't want us to know or doesn't want it to be disclosed, that explains the level of duplicity here, that explains how a guy that deserves the title, maybe not the, but certainly one of the nation's most esteemed infectious disease experts, can be completely deconstructed by me, who got thrown out of college because I didn't attend classes for an entire semester, but played Super Tecmo Bowl instead, because it's one logical fallacy after another. Things that don't make sense. They don't philosophically add up. He's arguing fallacies every day. I mean, 2 weeks ago, he went on Meet the Press and said, if you're vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask because you still might be contagious, which I'm sure the CEOs of Pfizer and Moderna just love that. And then later that same morning, Cheryl, he went on CNN and said, these Republicans, because, that's what every public health official does, single people out politically. These Republicans want the restrictions to go away, and yet they're the least likely to get vaccinated. It seems paradoxical. Well, brother, paradoxical is you went on one television station and told them, even if still vaccinated, they're still leopard colony members of COVIDstan. And then you went on another station and said, I can't believe you don't want to get vaccinated to get your life back. Which is it?
Yeah.
These sorts of logical fallacies exist with him all of the time. I don't believe it's because he's dumb, and I don't believe it's just some banal, vapid effort to hold on to his stardom. This guy was already well known and respected in his circles. He was already feted at banquets. He was already a key speaker on the circuit. He already attended all kinds of AIDS benefits and fundraisers annually all over the world. I don't believe the guy's just getting his belly rubbed. I believe there's some piece of information out there that he knows that he doesn't want us to know that would explain the missing link in most of his argumentation.
I find it fascinating, and I know our time is tight. We only have a minute left. But I find it fascinating that you narrowed it down to March 11th, which, that just raises the question, who did Anthony Fauci speak with on March 10th, right? Where was he? Who was he speaking with? And I think that would be a key to understand. But just in the last minute we have, Fauci and Bargan, the most powerful and dangerous bureaucrat in American history. What is the core theme that you want people to get out of this book? And also, is there hope that we can get our liberties back?
We're starting to get them back now. Pardon me, somewhat. They're coming back slower than I would have expected. But they are on the way back in a lot of places. We just, the news that just came out yesterday, the Gavin Newsom recall, I think it's at least somewhat driven by this, if not mostly. So I think that, we're now over 65% of American school children are back getting in-person instruction. That number was 42% when we finished the manuscript of this book around the 1st of March. So that's how much it has grown in just the last couple of months.
Okay.
So momentum is swinging our way where this stuff is concerned. But I think the two biggest lessons for audiences to take away from this book, and we give you the information, and any, information, whoever controls the flow of information in any culture, Cheryl, has control. This is data and information, a lot of it from mainstream sources, that you have been denied by your media and your public officials for the last year. So this is what you need to go to your school board, to go to your city council, your state legislature, and get your way of life back, because we've been denied two bedrocks of American healthcare. Number one, informed consent, right? Like you're
Absolutely.
told how much that chemotherapy treatment for pancreatic cancer, how successful it typically is or not, right? You're told things like that, aren't you? And then you make the decision whether to engage in a treatment that will have, some devastating side effects based off the ratio of success. You get to make those sorts of decisions. You've been denied that with much of the data that we provide in this book that most people are never going to have seen before. And then the right to a second opinion. One of the things that shocked me is I really thought from the beginning this would be a proxy for global warming. The same people on the same sides. What shocked me is that the nation that gave us Greta Thunberg has been the one nation control group against COVIDstan. That there have been experts from Harvard, Yale, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, Oxford, from the very beginning saying this is flat earth voodoo. This is not science. Why are we doing stuff like this? One of the most outspoken critics of all of this is Dr. Martin Kulldorff at Harvard. He designed the VAERS incident site for the CDC, which debuted prior to the COVID outbreak. He's been one of the leading skeptics in all of this from a mitigation standpoint. Why did we never get these second opinions? In the 15 days to flatten the curve, that initial shutdown, when you call timeout, you're like, all right, what are we dealing with here? Why didn't the Trump White House bring those counter experts in, put them in a room with Fauci, put them all on camera and say, all right, let's see who's got the best opinion here, and that's what we're going with.
Yep.
Why didn't we do that?
Right.
Cheryl, if you and me and anyone in your office or your audience, if we were given a dire diagnosis, would we not immediately want to get a second opinion before just accepting that as fact, given the consequences of doing so? Of course we would. Why were we denied that for the last year? All the answers to those questions are bad.
They certainly are. And, it's I want my civil liberties back. And under Anthony Fauci, he's determined to keep them for himself. And America's facing some dark times, I think, still. So Steve Deace, co-author of Fauci and Bargain, the most powerful and dangerous bureaucrat in American history. You wrote that with Todd Erzin. This is a phenomenal book. No wonder it's a bestseller, and people have to read it. I want to thank you, Steve, for your time so much and for writing this book.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good to be back here with the Washington Times.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Seriously, this has to be one of the most important books that you can pick up this year. If you need to be armed with the facts of what's really going on behind the scenes with Anthony Fauci and the platform that he's been given to advise governments in America to shut down and steal American citizens' freedoms, pick up this book, Fauci and Bargain. It'll give you the facts you need to refute those who want to live in fear instead of fighting for their liberties. Thanks for listening. Appreciate your time. Tune in next week. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold, blunt, stay bold.